relatively new. I mean, the whole notion of microplastics, the pervasive.
Just before we begin, I'm John. I'm with MUSC Sustainability and Recycling. We do this every month for different topics. We're happy to have Al here with the South Carolina Aquarium. And if you guys have to go, like if you have a short break, feel free to just walk out. It's all very casual. So thank you guys. Thanks, Al.
And also, I would like to say thank you for being here. Thank you to the MUSC Sustainability and Recycling Office. Also want to thank my colleague, Christy Hughes, who, if you stay around long enough, going to hear from her, and she's going to talk about some of the substantive things we're doing to not only talk about the problem, but to be a part of the solution. And like I said before, I'm not here to be formal. Let's just have a conversation. And so what I want to do first is just to sort of lay out some general broad thumbnail sketches, and then we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the data. Hey, I know this familiar face. Dr. Leticia Abraham, that I just want to say I love this woman, and we've had a chance to work together on some other issues as well, like climate change and sea level rise. So it's great to see you. And so, like I said before, the purpose of this, I'm not gonna bore you with a presentation. I just want to have a conversation, right? So first and foremost, before we started talking about, well, when did this whole phenomenon of microplastics come about? To be honest with you, I mean, microplastics and the plastic revolution has been around for a long time. I wasn't personally around to see the movie The Graduate, but I know the movie The Graduate. He said there's a classic line in that movie, "My son, the future is in plastics," right? And it was a whole nother interesting backdrop going on in that movie beyond the future's in plastics. But in so many ways, that movie was prophetic, because what it ended up doing, it actually talked about how we were going to shift away from what I consider to be, not too long ago when I was growing up, everything was reusable. Like literally I had a thermos, I had my lunchbox. I didn't even know what single use was. I mean, and my grandma was the originator of upcycling. I didn't know that people used, jam drawers for anything else other than drinking stuff out of. Now it's all fancy, now we, you go to the little fancy little restaurants and everybody using the craft jars. But I want you to know, I was doing that like 30, 40 years ago. I mean, my grandma had me drinking out of mason jars. So the point being is that not so long ago, we were not fixed and we were not as inundated with plastics are we are now. And the problem, what has occurred like over the last 40 years is that it hasn't been just been a proliferation of the plastic production, which I'm gonna talk about some of those numbers which are staggering, right? The biggest problem here is that these plastic related elements are getting out into a natural environment. Now, let's go back to microplastics, right? Microplastics is two ways in which something can become a microplastic. One being that they can literally be manufactured or produced in a way that would have them fall beneath the 5 millimeter size. That's the definition of what is a microplastic. Anything that is 5 millimeters or less, right? Now, one way to do that would be basically for someone to manufacture as a part of a cosmetic product, as part of a toothpaste, as a part of things like, your clothing, if it has any type of plastic base, if you wash it, all of a sudden, whatever the fragments come off can become a microplastic, right? Another way this occurs is that when you have things like plastic bottles, plastic bags, and other related plastic material that get out into the physical aquatic environment. And what people forget sometimes, the data shows that basically, if you have a plastic bag, plastic bottle, anything that's literally laying on the street or on somebody's lawn, if it's within 50 miles of any type of water source, whether it's a lake, whether it's a river, anything that's a part of the watershed, chances are it's going to make its way into that watershed. And so one of the key things, and so once it's in the watershed, and that's why this issue is very critical, because here and around this part of the world, we're very proactive about beach sweeps. We love beach sweeps. I mean, it seems like every other week we have a beach sweep in this part of the world. But when I tell people, the plastic that is getting into the environment is land-based, and not this land-based beachfront related land-based. That literally, if someone is living in Colombia, if someone is living in Greenville, upstate, if they have access to part of the watershed, and if you have any type of plastic related material that's within 15 miles of that watershed, then it has a high likelihood of getting into that water cycle. And so this issue is not just about the marine environment, we have incredible data that talks about the impact of plastic on terrestrial environments as well, not as microplastics, but just as a phenomenon, right? Now, the other piece of this that adds a little bit of nuance is that has anyone in here ever seen a plastic bag like floating around any parking lot or any? And so the thing that makes a plastic bag unique, it's almost like a kite. So whereas we talk about 15-mile principles with like a bottle or something that may not be mobile through the air, but the difference with a plastic bag is that it is mobile. It has the ability to literally glide to different places where it makes that its ability to get into a watershed far more pervasive, far more dynamic because of the wind-based level in which it can be taken. And the only reason why I walk these steps about that is that whatever winds up inside of what I call the watershed, and if it comes down the watershed and it winds up in the marine aquatic environment, we forget sometimes that the marine aquatic environment is one of the most corrosive things known on this planet in terms of breaking anything down. And one of the ideas that people have out there when they talk about these garbage islands or these gyres, they think about it as a solid waste. But anybody who's had a chance to go to the gyres and spend time there, which, you know, when I bring up BDP, I want to segue into that. So Dr. Marcus Erickson is founder of the 5 Gyres, right? And he was one of our presenters at the Breaking Down Plastics event, which was it was a day-long event that we hosted here, basically in collaboration with the Aquarium Conservation Partnership. The Aquarium Conservation Partnership is a newly minted collection of 19 of the leading aquariums inside the United States of America, where our sole goal and purpose over the first 2 years is to engage a specific topic that we believe is sort of right now under-resourced. The topic that we chose is plastic, for a lot of reasons that we're going to elaborate on. So as a part of this Breaking Down Plastics event, and Dr. Erickson came as one of our keynote speakers, one of the key things that he's done, he's been out to every one of the gyres. He's actually physically characterized every last one of the gyres. And the critical thing that he wanted to communicate when he came to Charleston is that these garbage patches are not solid material. It's more like a smog of plastic. The ocean has broken this stuff down into a slurry. So you see all these sort of great ideas, and they had a lot of traction about this young man from Scandinavia who had like a vacuum for the ocean. That's not going to work, people. Because what we have is we have the ocean breaking this stuff down into very fine particles, and so it gets so go back to microplastics. The things that's out in the smog are microplastics. A big part of the consistency of this smog falls beneath that 5 millimeter range. Now, why is that important? Why are we concerned with these type of issues? And the critical thing that I want all of us to just get a hold of is this, and I'm gonna walk the dog a little bit with some of the urgency of the issues and just walk it a little bit. But basically, plastic pollution is found in almost every marine habitat on Earth, including polar regions and polar ice. It also has been found in some of the deepest trenches in the Earth. So despite the fact that this sort of plastic revolution has only been around for about 30 years or 30, 40 years in terms of its proliferation, it is now literally, it's in places that we didn't think it could reach. The other piece of this is that even though the plastic is being broken down into these very fine like silt or smog or what we call microplastics, its ability to stay in the environment is almost to perpetuity, meaning that these microplastic fibers, once they're broken down to this level, can be in our environment for hundreds and maybe thousands of years. So what we put into the environment is an aggregation effect, right? Now, going to the proliferation of plastic. From 1964 to 2015, global plastic production has increased 20-fold, rather from 15 million tons being produced back in 1964 to now 322 million tons in current day, okay? Out of that tonnage that is produced as a part of this sort of production principle of us having this disposable economy, approximately 8.8 million tons of plastic enter into our ocean from land-based related endeavors every year, and that number is expected to double by 2025. So not only are we having, so that's the equivalent of a dump truck load of plastic being dumped in the ocean, like something like every hour or something like that, right? So we have this issue. Now, in full disclosure, one of the key things we talked about in the Breaking Down Plastic event that was held that we hosted here in Charleston is that this is, of course, a global issue. You know, you have places like Southeast Asia, which are known for being notorious for this plastic pollution. But one of the key things that I love that I think Amy Davis said, who was also part of this meeting, that a lot of times, whether or not we know it or not, we are the ones who created this, what we call this disposable culture. We as Americans, we're some of the largest plastic producers in terms of the world. So even though we know that Southeast Asia has issues around its environmental control and its waste management considerations, we also were part and parcel of creating those dynamics. It's not to pass blame, but it's also just to recognize the fact the role that we play, or potentially could play as global leaders, which we are. Americans throw away, on average, 200 pounds of plastic every year per person. That includes 100 billion plastic bags, and basically of that 100 billion plastic bags, and of this 200 pounds of plastic per year that every American generates, only roughly about 10% of this is recycled. So what we currently have is, because a lot of people think, well, you know, if you recycle, we're recycling, that's good enough. But the problem is that we're only recycling a very small percentage of the amount that's currently being produced. A lot of this is actually arriving into the physical environment. A particular concern, though, and this gets to the punchline while we're here, is fragments less than 5 millimeters in size, known as microplastics. And so we discussed that there's two ways in which you can arrive at the microplastic. One being that literally microplastics can be manufactured as a part of a cosmetic, as a part of toothpaste, as a part of other related products, or as just as an erosion principle, or as just being broken down into the environment can become a microplastic. And these small sizes that should be of greatest criticality and should be of greatest concerns is what allows these microplastics to enter at the lowest trophic levels, meaning that basically, as of last year, they actually had researchers out of the UK actually characterize or put on film a zooplankton ingesting plastic. And I don't know about you, but that's one of the scariest things I've seen over the last 20 years. Because what you don't realize and what we don't appreciate is that the zooplankton creates the base of the food chain for the entire Earth, along with phytoplankton. So to have something that creates the basis, one of the foundational pillars of the global food chain, eating this stuff, there are ramifications. But the other thing that is of concern, and we're going to get, this is another one of our punchlines, is that because this is all relatively new, the line of sight as in relation to research is limited. I went to a meeting that was not on plastic, but was on ocean acidification. And one of the key things they were trying to do an analysis of, well, where would be the areas in which we would need to invest more money in certain critical areas. One of the points that was raised at that meeting was the fact that there was little line of sight on zooplankton. That zooplankton, unfortunately, was not one of those areas that had received a lot of research attention, a lot of research funding. So you have me hearing that over a year ago, and then literally when I saw the, ingesting of plastic by zooplankton on the video, you need to realize that's a critical blind spot that we need to get after, and we need to be considerate of. The other thing, yes, yes,
I wanted to revisit MUSC.
yeah.
So MUSC recycles 27% of our waste stream. Just want to let y'all know that.
Yeah, yeah.
And most of the stuff that is not recycled is still plastic.
Yeah.
Because in the medical field, I'm working every day here, that most of what we use at MUSC to treat patients and
Correct.
Research and all is plastic.
Correct.
So
And so those are critical pieces of distinction. And again, the only reason why I wanted to take a minute to frame it a little bit, because I think, I've had, in my lifetime, people have always talked about litter. I mean, I remember, don't be a hoot, don't pollute. I'm saying that's for some of you, like what he just said, is he speaking Gothic or Greek? No, that was an anti-litter campaign from like the 70s and 80s. But the problem is that plastic is not your everyday type of litter. And that's why we've personally at the aquarium have had a very keen focus on it, because unlike, say, an aluminum can which has other issues, unlike something made of wood or something that's biodegradable, that literally will break down into the environment and will become a part of the environment. The problem with this production of the plastic is that, by definition, a polymer, a plastic is a polymer. And if anybody have taken chemistry, know that by definition, polymer is something that's hard to break down. It has a certain stability that gives it a designation as a polymer, right? So the critical thing here, and to your point, is we need to be aware that this is a serious issue. It's not going to be a serious issue. It is a serious issue. And number two, that if we are on track to double the amount of this stuff entering into our environment, that is even something that I don't even want to try to comprehend. Because at the end of the day, what it boils down to is that if you have zooplankton mistaking it for food, then you have those things feeding upon the zooplankton, right? Like the krill and other things that create the second base level of the trophic level. Then you have whatever's feeding on the krill, the smaller fish, and then the whales that feed on the krill. You have this, we call it bioaccumulation. Now, the key point why you should be concerned with this is that one of the persistent but yet known properties of plastic, especially microplastic, is its ability to have an affinity for things that are already in the water column. Meaning if you have any harmful chemicals, meaning if you have anything in the water column, it'll naturally be attracted to this. So it's not just about the plastic itself will be bad enough inside the water column. The fact of the matter is that anything is within that water column, one of the critical properties of that fine plastic fault is the high surface area. And as a part of that high surface area, you have what you call bioaccumulation related principles. Well, it will attract those things that's in the water column. And of particular note, once you have that absorbed and you say you take it up the trophic, right? You go from the zooplankton to the krill, from the krill to the shrimp, from the shrimp up to the small fish, from the small fish up to the apex predator. And then in this case, we can consider ourselves part of the top of the food chain. That you have some potential implications around amplification of certain things that in and of itself you would have exposure to by these things swimming inside these marine aquatic environments. But when you take plastic in the mix, being a part of their meal, being a part of what they eat, being a part of what they ingest, you basically then can accentuate or amplify whatever's in that water column if there's anything that has any toxic related components. Now, this is in addition to the fact that plastic in and of itself has certain leaching or negative principles that can leach and have negative detrimental impacts on your body or on anything that is alive. So hopefully after we do all that, you realize why you should be concerned, right? That this is not something that basically is not one of these endeavors that just because the tree huggers want us to stop drinking plastic bottles is an evil plot to basically try to we can't enjoy our drinks. No. What we're trying to basically just communicate is that it's not to say that plastic is very useful. It's in a place that you need to have sterility related principles, in a place that you need to have contamination as a critical part. You need to have things that's disposable, that you know is sterile when it comes out of the package, which we're not here to argue that. But the critical thing that we are trying to communicate is that if we're not conscientious as a society on how we make sure that this stuff does not get into the physical environment and get into our waterways, we're creating our own apocalyptic scenario, to be blunt with you, right? But the bottom line is this, and this is the punchline. In an EPA report that was actually released last year in December of 2016, the EPA did an analysis, a review of microplastics and plastics in general. And the bottom line is that EPA, after doing all this analysis, it basically said we need more research. I mean, that was basically the bottom line. And if you're interested, I have the people here. We can send you a link to the paper. But basically, these are some of the areas in which the EPA said because we don't have a line of sight, because we haven't done the physical research on the human ramifications, we don't understand about the amplification principles as it relates to us as the apex predator, eating the things that's eating these things that's in the water column. We need to do some research. But the only thing I would say about that research is that, guess what? That research is going to need to be site-specific. And what I mean by that is that the Citadel released a report 1 year ago, 2 years ago, about 7 tons of plastic being currently degraded in the Charleston Harbor. So this is not something we're talking about far away at this point. We're talking about literally 7 tons as we speak is currently in the Charleston Harbor. And that, guess what? As every day passes and as every day passes, that accumulation principle is increasing, right? We also have research from Dr. Pat Fair, who's actually an adjunct professor here at MUSC, talked about how our dolphins inside of our harbor had some of the most toxic biopsies in the country. Because guess what? They're apex predators. So whatever it is, we talk about bioaccumulation, we talk about amplification of effects. So my point is that sometimes when you think about marine science, and I know we're here in the state of medical university with a lot of great reputation, but my thing is, what I take pride in as a marine biologist is that when you see something like that, when you hear something like that, that should draw a pause. You should think about that, right? Because if they're coming up with some of the most toxic biopsies in the entire country, who else is eating food out of that basin? Now, mind you, they're in it all day long, so they're swimming through the water column, they're in it 24/7. But the bottom line is, we all know about the local related coverage of Shem Creek. And I apologize, I get a little stirred up because I think sometimes we're so fixed on our own physical built environment, we forget that we're part of the animal kingdom. We forget that we only have one home. They talk about going to Mars, but who cares about Mars? Mars is not habitable. You could spend all these $1 billion going to Mars. Spend that money here to help us clean up this mess. Help us make sure we can stay here on this earth for a little longer. My apologies. That's just a sidebar. That's just a sidebar. So I just wanted you to know, just as a backdrop, why in the world this is something you should care about, right? Because at the end of the day, what our role has been at the South Carolina Aquarium and what we've been about over the last 2 years, and as we've moved our conservation department forward, is that we need to be able to look at our natural environment not just as something that is a nice to do in terms of keeping the health of it, in terms of preserving the health of it, but ultimately if we keep that the way it needs to be, we're going to keep ourselves. And so the critical piece of this that I just want you to get a hold of is that this is an issue. It's not going to be an issue. A critical part of this is how do we manage those waste streams? How do we make sure that those waste streams don't get out, that we don't have this plastic get out into the environment? And the critical thing for us all is to realize that this is not just about tree hugging, that literally, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in any place that is considered to be toxic. I don't want to be anywhere that's considered to be toxic. I mean, that to me is just like a red flag. I mean, I lived in Atlanta for 14 years, and one of the key things I said is that I can't live in a place any longer where the air quality is like so bad until literally they tell you don't breathe outside today. I mean, that's just ridiculous. How can you not breathe outside? I mean, like, what I'm gonna do over here? Can I walk outside with an air mask on? I'm like, I gotta get the heck out of here. I gotta get back home to the low country. I gotta be someplace where literally the air that I'm breathing is not shorting my life. I mean, it's data that says basically your air quality can be different between 6 to 7 to 10 years of your life expectancy. But you take that same principle and you think about the water, and you think about the fact how much we enjoy the water around here, right? How much we spend time in the water, how much our children spend time in the water, how much we eat out the water. And so the only thing I'm saying that it don't have to be a tree hugger principle for us to say we have to care for this. Literally, it could be a selfish principle. It could be all about the whiffle. And the whiffle simply is you do not want to be eating anything out of a water column or being in a water column that is toxic. And the only thing I'm trying to communicate to you is that these plastic fibers that are allowed to break down inside of our aquatic habitat is actually accentuating that toxicity principle. Now, to take a step back further, there's a reason why we have certain names around here, like I think Phosphate Road, right?
Right.
What was this place known for at one point?
Phosphate mining.
Phosphate mining, right? We were known for the place that the South Carolina Aquarium was built on was a brownfield site. They had to do remediation big time. Just to be with, we found out. For those of us working there, we found out if I get strange growth coming off my feet in the next 10 years, I'm like, they didn't do it well. They did not do it well. So the point being is that we have a history here from a production principle. But now, what is going on also that is very prominent, that is going to bring more commerce here? What's going on inside of the harbor? Dredging. And what do you think that dredging is going to do? Whatever has been in the settlement, that's one of the things that we don't talk about. So my point is that plastic being inside that water column, say, because let's think about it, the difference between 30, 40 years ago. If you did that same dredging 40 years ago without the reduction of the plastic principle, microplastics, there's a high likelihood that you can have a higher rate of those things settling out in the water column. But the danger of a microplastic being in play, which we fast forward 40 years, guess what those things like to do? They attract those things. Those things that used to just fall out of the water column, all of a sudden they're serving as those aggregates of those type of materials. So all of these things are part and parcel of things we need to take, thank you for coming, things we need to take as consideration. So quickly and just wrapping up. So we had the Breaking Down Plastic event, and again, if you're interested in learning more about what was said there, this is just a slate of all the presenters, and we covered this topic from any perspective you would want. We also have a YouTube channel with all of the major, the main presentations. A part of that communication was actually talk about human health. Dr. Fair and other related people had a chance to communicate those things. I also wanted to mention just briefly that one of the things that we've been about at South Carolina Aquarium is we've not been about just dumping on people about the problem. What's the solution, right? How we get at the solution? So we've had the pleasure of working, in particular, with the Mount Desert Island Biological Laboratory, which is based in Bar Harbor, Maine, to create a brand new citizen science app, which I'm gonna allow Christy to elaborate on in just a couple of minutes. And the base premise of where this EPA report came out to, basically this EPA report highlighted these areas of research which you can read in greater detail, and I'm not gonna bore you with the details, but basically they also said that in final conclusion, that in addition to these areas of research, our bottom line is, we need to make sure, basically I'm just gonna give you the summation of the bottom line. We need to make sure this stuff doesn't get out into the physical environment. I mean, that's what they said, that minus barring these other areas of exploration, barring these areas of consideration, the bottom line is what can we do to not have this enter into the physical environment. And so the premise of the citizen science deal is I'm gonna let Christy elaborate more about it, but just wanted to let you know that we have been fortunate to really collaborate with a world-class institution that in a lot of ways have had they're a medical-based institution. The only difference between you guys and them is that they look at 100% marine aquatic related and freshwater related principles to look at human health related issues. It's all medically based, but it's looking at the environment as a way to sort of ascertain answers and to unlock innovation that can improve human health, looking at both the marine and freshwater related models for that. So we've been fortunate to work with them in that endeavor. And then with the expectation that this has all been leading towards ANIC data. And at this point, I'm gonna allow Christy Hughes to come up and give you some onesies and twosies about what is ANIC data all about.
Perfect, thanks, Al. And like I was saying, the problem can easily seem insurmountable and make you want to just throw up your hands and walk away from it. But one thing I love about our conservation department, we're very solutions focused, and there are absolutely solutions to the plastics problem. It's not overwhelming. It's a very solutions-focused approach that we are taking to this. From a big picture standpoint, if you're looking at solutions, there's a lot of innovation occurring with different materials, such as Andrew Falcon with full cycle bioplastics, using organic waste to create a new type of biobenign plastic that can be integrated into various types of products. Chris Gove, some of you may have seen his great video of a sea turtle eating a six-pack ring. So he's using waste from the brewery, I believe it's to create a six-pack ring that's biobenign and edible by wildlife. So if it does leak into the environment, there's really no harm. So from the big picture, there are solutions being innovated. Plastics are certainly not to be demonized, especially from the medical field. We're certainly not going to go back to doing blood transfusions from glass containers. Plastics have been amazing to advance a lot of science in the medical field. From a local perspective, however, here in South Carolina, in our watershed, in our region, what we are doing is citizen science as a solution. So crowdsourcing information to inform local solutions to benefit local communities. And this is a way that everyone can be involved, be informed, and move forward to improve the health of our communities and our wildlife. Just a quick purview on our sea turtle hospital at the aquarium, we have had 17 sea turtles that have come in that we know ingested plastics. Various health effects due to that. If the plastic causes an impaction in the GI tract, it can be fatal. We've done 2 surgeries to remove plastic from the GI, and others have passed it on their own. But we're seeing it locally. We're seeing the problems in our wildlife, and as I was talking about with the food chain, you know, we eat oysters, we eat other seafood from our ocean. So in the future, what does that mean? So moving forward with the solution, working with these wonderful people, Dr. Jane Disney and Duncan Bailey, who's the web developer at MDIBL, they have created this platform. It's a crowdsourced platform where everybody can contribute data, and that data can then be used to benefit communities, perhaps by informing policy. So one thing we've done with this website, I'll show you our project. We do have multiple projects on here right now. One is on plastic pollution. It's this one, the Litter Free Digital Journal, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a digital journal that documents plastic pollution around the state, around our region. We also have this is from Washington State, but we also have a project on sea level rise, sea rise beta, which we will have some exciting functionality coming this fall. We're really excited about that. And then a lionfish project, which is launching soon for fisheries conservation. But for plastic in particular, this is a relatively new platform for citizen science. We've only had it up a little over a year. So far, you can see up here we have 38 contributors, everybody from individuals like school children to groups like Surf Rider, Charleston Waterkeeper, a lot of the wonderful groups that we have. They're already working in this community. And so what we are doing is sharing this information around the state, and people can then use either the web platform or an app, and I passed out a little paper to everyone that explains our app. And they can, like these, I love these guys. So children, this is accessible for children as well. They can go out to whatever habitat they're in, whether it's a beach, a forest, their neighborhood, their school campus, their playground, and they can remove plastic from that environment, remove debris, and then report it on the app or on the website. And what this does, while one report may seem inconsequential, once we have a lot of reports and a lot of people contributing, and you get to reports like this one from Folly Beach. And this group obviously spent a lot of time on the beach removing different types of debris materials and then recording and reporting that. What we get is a database of information that can then be used to inform policy. For the 2 ordinances that we have in effect right now in South Carolina, the one on Folly Beach that bans styrofoam, plastic bags, and balloons on the beach. We did contribute data. We served as expert witnesses for the city council to provide information and allow them to make an informed decision about what they wanted to do for their community, and they did decide to move forward with the ban. Isle of Palms did the same thing as well. So people can easily access this, contribute, and one thing I love about this platform is it's all open source, open access. So anybody can go to this platform and access this data and download this data, and it's available in 3 different formats: Excel, an ArcGIS shapefile, as well as Google Earth, so people can use it in the way they see most beneficial. And there's also graphing capability. So those of you that have seen the aquarium, next to us we have a little stretch of beach. It's maybe 30 feet wide. It's really, really tiny. And we've been doing cleanups on that beach for a little over a year at this point. Very, very tiny beach. And let me bring up, I'm going to bring up the graphing because this platform does allow anyone to analyze that data very, very easily. Oh, debris type. In whatever form they deem appropriate. So if we filter by our little aquarium beach right here, and this is just data over the past year or so, what we're seeing locally in the harbor at the aquarium, we're seeing almost 1,500 pieces of styrofoam. That is our major problem at this beach. So what's the solution? I'm not quite sure yet for us, but being able to track this and document this and figure out what the main problem is, it's critical. And if you extrapolate this, again, this is a very tiny little beach, maybe 30 feet wide. If you extrapolate this to the entire harbor, and we look at information like Dr. John Weinstein's report on the Charleston Harbor with the 7 million tons of debris, and he's extrapolating that you can find 1 piece of plastic for every 2 steps along that shoreline, which is almost 400 miles long. We're seeing reinforcement of that evidence here. So,
Can I ask a question?
yeah.
So, like in my neighborhood, we have a boat landing. Can you set that up as a location?
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about the app is that it geolocates automatically. So wherever you are, and I can bring up a map as well. I've been in the upstate at the state parks up there. So right now we have 128 sites. These are all ours here. And as you zoom in, you can see where action is being taken. So wherever you are, if you're using the iPhone app, for example, it's going to automatically geolocate you. And so we'll find if it's a boat landing, we'll easily find that. The really neat thing about the app as well, which it's only available on iOS 10 at this point, but it's soon going to be available on Google Play and across all devices. We are also partnering with Bigelow Labs. And they have developed this amazing, essentially forecasting feature for debris. And so on the map on the app, it takes into account various variables, currents, winds, that type of thing, and it looks at the data that's input so far, and it forecasts. It's called a nowcasting feature. It forecasts where that debris is going to flow. So it looks at the watershed, and the map would show different variations of a red color depending on degree of severity, even through into the water here, and to show the currents. And eventually, once we have more data to inform it entered in, it will become even more useful and will be a predictive indicator of where actions are needed and if there is debris in that water, where it's going to end up. So really, really amazing feature through Bigelow Labs, but a lot of information, a lot of capability coming from a very simple thing that even children can contribute to. So working with school groups, working with CSC Office of Sustainability, we're developing a partnership with them now, Palmetto Pride, everywhere around the state. It's a very accessible, easy platform. There are times when I'm walking to East Bay Deli for lunch and I'll see litter, a straw or something on the road, and I can pick it up, and as I'm walking, just enter it in the app really quick. It takes maybe 30 seconds. And that's removed from the environment, but also goes to inform data for people to access and use. So open source, crowdsource, open access.
So what happens to this data? What's the plan? What's going to be done with the data?
It's for the public, and we have used it so far to talk to the Folly Beach City Council, but anybody can use it. We've had a woman that contacted us recently from Data Island, a little farther south, that she wanted to go to her community leaders and express her personal concern about plastics in her environment, and see if there was a solution. So she can take whatever data she finds relevant on the site and use it to inform community leaders. So,
Okay.
but again, this program is very new. It's only been around about a year, and we're just now sharing it around the state.
Right.
But it's for anybody to use. There's no black box here at all. It's all open access.
Hey, Christy, is it, it's only in the state, right? You can't do it somewhere else?
It theoretically works everywhere
Yeah.
because it is a
Okay.
GIS-based platform, and it's an intelligent platform. But at this point, our focus is on South Carolina, our region. We go down to Savannah.
South Atlantic Bight.
Yeah.
The strong part of us being affiliated with MDIBL, and this is the exciting part for me, is that people come here. I mean, we're the #1 tourist destination in the world, and people want to be participatory. And the beautiful thing about this app functionality is that even if you're from Oklahoma, even if you're in Cincinnati, Ohio, any place that you can pick up plastic and keep it from entering into the watershed, you can make a difference. And so part of it is one of the big things, at least from millennial research that we delved into as a part of BDP. Millennials don't want you just to talk at them about the problem; they want to be a part of the solution, right? And the critical thing about what we're doing is a little bit of twofold, right? One hand, how do we get people in the game? Right? How do we give you a tool that can literally, you could be a part of the solution? And then the other part of why we were excited is that one of the knocks on citizen science is that some people see it as hokey, some people see it as not being used for real science. But guess what? Dr. Jane Disney, she created this platform because she was trying to preserve Frenchman's Bay. It's real scientific research that she's leveraging this data to inform decision-making principles. And so, like in the case you think about the little small beach, that we have right next to us, right? That if you have over 1,500 pieces of styrofoam showing up on that small beach, in what 50 paces, about 50 paces of stepping, right there alone, that could tell you from just a small sample what's in that water. Because that's a main thoroughfare in terms of shipping, that's what a main shipping lane is. So if someone asked the question proverbially, well, what constitutes how do we have any data in terms of what constitutes what's in the shipping channel? What we've been able to establish, even it's a very small patch of dirt, we've been able to establish a way to codify that data and at least give people some insights in terms of what we've been able to see coming out of that harbor that could inform a thought process, yes.
Okay, now, I'm not trying to say I'm old enough to remember this now, but
Yeah.
the DDT once was used
You're absolutely correct.
widespreadly around the world until they found out with, examples people were able to probably demonstrate
That's right.
the effects it was having on, the apex predators,
That's right.
especially raptors. I
Yeah.
think was the key
Yeah.
thing, and the nation's symbol, the bald eagle, was really
About to be gone.
endangered species.
Yeah.
Because of this, people took action.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing this as a means for that kind of demonstration of how it's harming our environment.
Yeah.
But the significance of the harm has to really be illustrated at such a level before you're going to get people to act. Because it's like the global climate thing. How
Yeah.
the current administration, how they're taking all these countermeasures to all the progress that people have been trying to make to turn these kind of things around. How are you gonna get people to stop using plastic? And,
Well, keep in mind.
I don't mean this negative. I know you can do it, but I'm saying this is the way to do it.
we gotta be precise.
You're right. You
So-
gotta be
so
precise.
what I
You
mean
have
by-
to be able to attack them
so-
in ways that they cannot deny.
Well, the first thing, I don't want to attack anyone. We're not here as attack dogs. Even though I've been called that a couple of times.
Well, maybe that's the wrong word.
But I think the key thing that we want to do, and what we've been about is, number one, how do we elevate awareness, right? So that people understand that this is not going to be a problem. It is a problem, right?
Right.
So we use our charismatic megafauna as a part of that communication. People love their sea turtles, especially our loggerheads. Our loggerheads have been dramatically impacted by this. We had one of our loggerheads had, several loggerheads had significant pieces of plastic, literally, if you can come and see that, right? And we've had some of our loggerheads. And so we basically communicated that these are the canaries in the mine. These are really the indicator species telling you what's going on. There's also incredible footage. If you literally just Google plastics and fish, you would find some of the most maybe unappealing photos that you can imagine of people opening up fish guts and all they're seeing is. And so my thing is there is a preponderance of data, right? And visual images that are already out there that people may not be aware of. But I think the critical thing that what we're endeavoring to do is that ultimately all action, like all politics, are local. And so the critical thing is, and at least one reason why we were concerned with the data is, if you say we have a problem and you can't document it, you're not gonna get anybody to listen.
Right.
But if I say that on a beach that's basically the size of this room, we've been able to collect over 1,500 pieces of styrofoam in less than a year, that gets people's attention, because all of a sudden it doesn't take a rocket science for you to extrapolate how much beachfront, how much, what's our physical touch point with water around here, right? So you're right. We are trying to give you more tools to help move people, right? That if you know physically what's going on and you don't have to speak in extrapolations or generalities, you can speak in very directed terms, then that's ultimately what's going to move people, and that's what we're thinking. So.
And it's not necessarily about stopping using plastic either, it's about innovating new materials and new solutions. It's about using it
And that's the
responsibly
key.
and using other
Right. So how you-
choices. Because
Right,
even
so-
like our jackets, my jacket that I'm wearing now is mostly based on plastic, so it's.
Right. So
moving
how
in the right
how
direction.
do you fund this kind of research? How do you stimulate the interest in
Well,
that to
well,
where
well,
it takes over?
I'm gonna pay you the $100 because you gave me my perfect segue, and this is the last one. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're part of this thing called Aquarium Conservation Partnership, and it's a consortium of 18, now 19 of the leading aquarium in the United States. And basically, what that constitutes is it's about to reach 20 million people, right? Now, all of us, we're part of this thing called AZA, which is the accredited entity that accreditates all zoos and aquariums. AZA is also a part of the ACP, and our total reach as AZA is 180 million people per year. That's how many people come through our physical doors. And really what our Machiavellian principle is as a part of this ACP initiative, because we're the South Carolina Aquarium, we're of course the regional ambassadors for the Low Country. But our role in this bigger role is what you just talked about. How do we come together to represent a national constituency base, right? That then can have a strategic discussion with the Cokes, with the Pepsis, right? To communicate why we believe that this is a critical issue that they need to, because ultimately that's going to be where you have to go. You would have to be able to talk to the people who are generating the products, who are currently the drivers of that. If the South Carolina Aquarium just shows up on the doorstep of Coca-Cola, they can listen to us and they will listen to us, but it would just be through the lens of one entity. If we showed up as a collaborative entity representing over 20 million people that we touch in a year, and then if we showed up as a collaborative entity that has a reach of over 180 million people per year, that has a different torque and a different perception. Right. And so one of the things, and again, where we're going with it is that we wanted to not only hit people with bad news, we wanted to give people the tools to get in the game to be a part of the solution. Also, one of the things that Chris and I have had the pleasure of doing the last year is that we have been a part of this broader based coalition, right, through the Aquarium Conservation Partnership, which, we're going to officially, you're going to hear about that next week. So you guys are, getting a preview of what you're going to hear about next week, that being announced, where all of the things you just communicated is our goal of how do we work as this collaborative to get at those things that you just talked about.
Right.
Because it's such big issues that if we just went to a Coca-Cola, to a Pepsi, anyone who's generating these products as individuals or as just a single entity, that has one ramification. But if we go to them as a collective group that represents over 20 million person reach in a year, and then by the way, we have AZA, which is our accrediting entity as a part of this group, which gives us a reach of 180 million people per year, that's a different voice track.
Right. So, and then with alternative product that they can use to replace the plastics they currently use. Because I don't know, at least 10, 15 years ago, they've had alternative forms of biodegradable plastics that could have been fully marketable now, could have taken the place of this.
That's the reality. That's one of the key things, unfortunately, that we deal with. There are market forces. I mean, we live in a real world, right? If people are making money off certain products, and if it's certain drivers that are driving those things, then naturally you're going to be resistant towards that. If you're making money, I mean, I'm a pragmatic person, I understand that. But the key thing that I think where we are as a society, and I just think this will be the concluding remarks, is at what point do we say that profiteering by a few is worth more than the collective consciousness and collective well-being of all? That's the question.
Right.
At what point do we say that?
At what point do we say, because that's what's happening. I mean,
That's what I'm saying.
even though we may feel that way, that's not what's driving the decision making.
No.
Where is basically the way things are set up is the powerful few, which is not wrong with that, are making decisions based on profiteering principles in a lot of ways, but not factoring in the negative externalities.
Right, and we buying into it. It's individuals, if we weren't buying these products, if we weren't supporting that thing in that economy, if we weren't elected.
But that's the whole point. I mean, unless people are aware and unless people understand the implications, then they may not understand that you need to vote with your wallet. That's the most effective vote that you can make. Yes.
I was going to ask about we were talking about the edible plastics that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
What's the cost difference for that? I'm assuming it's the only reason that they're not doing
Well,
it.
there've been some cost differentials, but the key thing is, and I say this, is that in a lot of our costs, we don't include. I mean, economics is simple. We don't include those things, the harmful related impact elements, right? And so just like your cost of gas, right? I know a lot of us get mad off 1 5-cent hike. We're gonna burn down capital, right? Because they hike up our gas by 5 cents. But in actuality, one could make an argument, given the negative impact that the particulate matter causes on human health alone, not even getting into any of the discussion, that the cost of that stuff is not high enough.
Right.
Because you're not factoring in air quality, you're not factoring in health-related implications, And so what they tell you about economics is that they call it elasticity principle, right? That sometimes you need to price something at a rate that reduces the amount of people utilizing it, right? But that's against the American way. We don't like that. We don't go that way. But in areas where they have used that, like in cigarettes, right? In terms of reducing smoking among adolescents, they realized that there was a certain price elasticity, that if they price it at a certain level, they could actually reduce the amount of people, young people in particular, who smoke because they become cost prohibitive, right? So the problem is that the only reason I say that is that the costing related issues is not just about the cost as it relates to what can you do, sort of how they produce it. I think you have to, if you're being conscious about it, I think you have to include, if you include the externality cost, I think it wouldn't even be a cost consideration.
Yeah, no,
And
I
just-
agree 100%. I'm wondering how big that gap is.
I can't give you a specific number,
Yeah.
but I know it's relatively low for the barley-based six-pack rings for Chris Grove and Saltwater Brewery, and it's to the point where he's gotten so much
Extra business
public
expenses
attention
for the city, I'm
because
sure
of the
it's way
innovation
different.
and the story, that it's been a very beneficial, positive business model for him. They're definitely profiting and they're trying to scale now. So if they can scale that solution larger, and then market forces will hopefully balance and support that.
Okay. What Marcus' comment? Any other questions? And the shameless plug, Christy's actually leading a beach sweep tonight at Folly Beach in collaboration with the Surf Rider, as well as the Folly Beach Turtle team. So if any of this stuff got you all inspired and ready to get in the game, we're gonna be there starting at 6 p.m. tonight.
Yep, Folly Beach, 6th Street West, so.
Looking for a round of applause for Al.